Vittorio.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Lazio Lounge. I'm Vittorio Campanile. With me, again, Alistair McKenzie. Hello Alistair, how are you?
Hello. Yeah, very good. Still feeling pretty happy about yesterday, getting a win. And now, just already quite excited about Wednesday, really.
Okay, good for you. I'm already concentrated for the Wednesday match. And we have Michael Di Mascio. Hello Michael, how are you?
Good to be back with you fine gentlemen again.
Good. It's good to have you back. We're going to talk about a lot of things because Lazio won yesterday against Cagliari. It was an important match. Let's call it like they are still for the fight for the Europe League. Lazio has still a chance to reach the Europe League in the Serie A, even though Torino won today, so it's a little bit more complicated. But we're going to talk about the final of Coppa Italia this Wednesday. Very important match against Atalanta. Alistair, what was positive in yesterday's match, looking forward for the final?
Well, I think there are quite a few things, to be honest. I mean, obviously, the result is the obvious one, because I think after the way we played against Atalanta last weekend, going to Sardinia wasn't a particularly attractive-looking thing to do. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of good performances as well in that game. Luis Alberto being the standout one. I think we'll probably get round to talking about the fact that, again, the second half wasn't as good as the first, and that's always a concern. But I think Luis Alberto having a nice game, the fact that Inzaghi could rotate his team to rest players with an eye to Wednesday and at the same time come away with a result that was pretty comfortable, to be honest, in the end. And we got to see Silvio Proto make his Serie A debut and have a good game as well. So, yeah, I think there are quite a lot of positives, more than I expected, if I'm honest, coming out of this.
Michael, are you positive as well, like Alistair?
You say a funny word, positive, because that's what I have been every time I've come on the show. I remember the last time we spoke, I think it was after the Fiorentina draw, and there was a lot of down faces, long faces, a lot of negativity, thinking that we weren't going to make the Champions League. And at the time, I really had a lot of faith that we were going to persevere, considering what the schedule was. And if you had told me after that day that we would have 1 point versus Chievo, Spal, and many others, unnotable teams, then I would never have believed you. I would have thought we would have been right in the thick of things in terms of the Champions League. But, to echo what Alistair said, yeah, there was a lot of positives, but more than anything, from what I saw, there was kind of three key things, pillars, I guess, to touch on from the performance from Lazio. One being frustrating because their build-up play was so fantastic at times, especially the first goal, taking advantage of some errors by Cagliari, who, let's be fair, were probably already half on vacation. Then there was the regret of the transfer market, of not technically strengthening the squad as much, because we could see finally some positives from some of the players that we brought in over the summer, and then confusion because sometimes Lazio looks so good in that match, and then they just shut it off, and then they require some heroics from Proto to save them. So I would say frustrating, regret, confusion kind of overshadow some of the positives of yesterday.
Yes, this is something I was saying yesterday in my video. Lazio too often, this season in particular, played a terrific first half, were dominated, maybe deserved to be 2 goals ahead instead of 1. And then in the second half, the team is like, we are so good that we don't even need to focus anymore. We already won this match. And what happens is that instead the other team is able to reopen the match, and sometimes Lazio loses points in a silly way, like there was the risk yesterday, because I thought Pavoletti's goal is just a lack of concentration of all Lazio defense. And if Protos, you were saying, didn't make a terrific save, Lazio would have drew a match that should have won 4-1, you know?
Story of the season, though, isn't it? I mean, how often have we seen this already? But I'm so annoyed to see that goal be conceded because, well, you know, it was a clean sheet would have been an ideal preparation for this game. I think Proto deserved it for the way he played in his debut as well. But also just, I mean, I was writing something ahead of Coppa Italia last week and came across the stat that Lazio have only won one second half in their last 14, which is now their last 15. So they were that close to finally coming out on top in the second half. But another interesting thing I saw as well is how much the possession changes. So it went from Lazio having 57% possession in the first half to 46 in the second half. And I think that tells you a lot about the way that the team's kind of setting up and the fact that they're very much playing on the front foot, taking the game to the opposition when they start. And then, like you say, once it gets to a point where they have to see the game out, it becomes more about launching counter-attacks, which, fair enough, worked yesterday for the second goal. But I think they can ask the opposition onto them a bit too willingly by doing that. And I don't think it's necessarily a great kind of long-term strategy to kind of tactically set yourself up completely differently from one half to the next. And Atalanta are so phenomenally good at turning over when they go behind, turning the result around, and that's something I'm quite worried about for Wednesday, if I'm honest.
I would echo what you said there, Alistair, and I like that you brought up some stats, and there was a few things I want to touch on, and it was brought to my attention that Lazio this year have only collected 75% of their points via home wins. Not to say yesterday obviously was an away result, whereas last year I think we collected far more points at home. So that's one of the many things wrong with it. Yes, second halves have been a really big key point into why we have finished poorly in matches that we probably should have won. The only thing that really comes to mind is the derby this year for having a good second half performance. Most of the time, the majority of the points we've collected this year are way of positive first halves. What I was going to ask too is we touched on Proto and his heroics, and I don't want to deviate from whatever sort of agenda we have, but how does everybody feel about his debut finally, and do we feel comfortable should a nice bid come in? Because we know it's only a matter of time before the rumors start, and Strakosha is young, so I anticipate that an offer will come in for him at some point this summer. And do we feel confident letting him go and giving the reins to Proto, who has experience in Europe? He's played for some prestigious clubs. For me, it's a yes, because I would rather sell somebody that we can replace right away than take a chance on and hope and go into the market to try to replace. Whereas we know we have a replacement in our midst already.
I shall start. Well, I think I wouldn't sell Strakosha at the moment because he's young. He's come from the Primavera, so I think he's linked to the club. And Proto is 35, turning 36 in a week or this week. I don't remember. So yeah, he's a good backup, but he cannot be the starting goalkeeper for a team who hopefully even next year will try to fight for the Champions League. So no, I would try not to sell.
But I'm just saying the reason why I said that is if you had to sell somebody, like let's say we realized, okay, we tried it a different approach this year, and that's where I was also frustrated because Lazio in the summer gave all the indications that they were serious about making the Champions League. For once, we actually kept hold of our quote-unquote best players of last season with Milinkovic-Savic and Luis Alberto. If we have to lose somebody, because it's evident that we didn't strengthen the squad enough over the summer, it's evident because the transfers that we did bring in, they barely start. How many times? I know we talked about Correa playing well, but he is a poor man's Felipe Anderson at some points this year, in the sense that at least Felipe Anderson was the devil. We knew what type of characteristics he was going to bring into the match when he came, even though he was inconsistent as well. I mean, if we're comparing it, we pretty much only replaced people. We haven't really strengthened the squad. If you want to argue that Correa is just as good as Felipe Anderson, fine. And same with Acerbi. We've only replaced De Vrij. We haven't really strengthened the squad. And I don't think any of the real players that we brought in over the summer have really commanded a starting place. Look no further than Badel, who finally had a good game yesterday. And he was probably one of my biggest regrets of the season, thinking that he would be able to be the vice Leyva right away. But this is why I'm saying eventually we're going to have to sell somebody if we want to really strengthen the squad. And the only person I can see really fetching big money at this point is Strakosha, because he's somewhat consistent and he's young and he'll be attractive to a lot of clubs.
I don't think Proto is the number one in my mind. I don't think Proto, well, I know that Proto doesn't think he's the number one. He's happy to be a number two. And I think that's what he is in my mind, is like you said, you mentioned his experience, and it's good to have an experienced guy as a number two. And I think the kind of setup we've got with our goalkeepers now of having a good young number one in Strakosha, an experienced number two, and then another young keeper as in Guerrieri as a kind of number three, that's quite a good collection of keepers to have. And I think it would have been nice to see a bit more of Proto, to rotate him into the lineup a bit more than he has this season. But he's not a number one. And I think I understand your argument about if the club are going to sell, and maybe Strakosha is the one you sell to generate good money. But I still don't think that the answer to that in that situation would be to promote Proto. I think you'd still need to invest in getting another goalkeeper in as a number one.
Do we know what we have with Guerrieri, though? I mean, we never really seen him outside of Primavera and playoffs and when he's on loan. Who knows?
Exactly. So I don't think you can go into a situation where you just promote Proto to number one, promote Guerrieri to number two, and expect everything to be fine. I think Strakosha, in my mind, I feel like if he were to go, he's one of these players where you kind of might look back on it and think, well, we didn't know how good we had it at the time. Strakosha has had a good season, and it's worth remembering that he's won us points single-handedly this season. I mean, he's made game-changing saves, and the first one that comes to mind is when we played at Empoli at the start of the season, and he made an incredible save right at the end of the game that meant we got 3 points instead of one. But he's done this on many occasions this season. I don't think I don't really want to get onto this topic at the moment because it's not really the time to do it. But in terms of the transfer market, I don't think we need to be selling star players to fund squad rebuild, because the club has money. We know it has money, and the balance sheets that have been published show that we have money. So I don't think that's necessarily a sell to buy is the kind of strategy they're going to be using in the market this summer. But like I say, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about transfer stuff at the end of the season. So for now, if it's okay with you guys, I'd prefer to focus on the Coppa Italia or the Cagliari game.
Yeah, let's go back to the Coppa Italia thing. We didn't understand if Strakosha is ready for Wednesday. This is probably the biggest question mark with Milinkovic-Savic. Inzaghi, after the match yesterday, said Milinkovic-Savic trained on Saturday, but he didn't look good, so that's why he didn't play. We still don't know for Wednesday. What's your opinion? Would you risk Milinkovic-Savic knowing that he's not 100% fit for the final, or you would go with other solutions?
You can take it, Alistair, if you want.
Well, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, from my perspective, I don't think it's worth the risk. I think that from what I've been reading, it sounds more likely that he'll take a place on the bench, and I think he's obviously a great option to have coming off the bench in a match. But I think the way that Marco Parolo's been playing recently has been encouraging. I wouldn't be against him getting a start, and with Alberto on the other side of Leyva, I think that is a pretty good midfield. Parolo is still putting in more distance covered than any other player in this team every single week, so we don't need to worry about his age in terms of it having an effect on his ability to get around the pitch. And he's not a guy who ever gets the headlines particularly, but I think he's dependable. Cataldi likewise is a dependable option there, and I think that we're not reliant enough on Milinkovic-Savic that we're that desperate to get him back into the team. I think that if we were talking about this question last season, we may well have been saying, well, we need Milinkovic to start this game because he is our game changer. But this season, it's not really been like that. And the way he's been playing, I don't think we need to necessarily rush him back into the team and make sure he starts. But I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I'm concerned and confused all at the same time because I know that I agree with what you've said. I trust Parolo to definitely make up the ground lost if Milinkovic-Savic isn't ready to go on the weekend. On Wednesday. But I'd also say that Inzaghi has shown us time and time again this year that he is a player's coach, and if Milinkovic-Savic says he wants to play, Inzaghi probably will oblige and find a way to work him in. He's done that up until recently with Immobile, even when there's games that maybe he should have sat and not started. So I am concerned that he has this sort of bias or he's afraid not to play him, because we do know what Milinkovic-Savic brings in terms of an imposing figure in the midfield. But who really wants somebody who's only 70 or 80%, whereas we know Parolo would be the heart that pumps through the midfield. And can you imagine him with Leyva together shutting down the midfield and cutting off their attacks? Because Atalanta, they love to play through the middle with Ilicic and Papu Gomez. So we're definitely going to rely on the likes of Leyva and Parolo come Wednesday to kind of shut that down. And I'm also concerned because I know Wednesday is coming and it is an important match. And I think that Lazio's shown time and time again, when the stakes are high this year, they really put it into another gear. Whereas we were confused with their performance against Chievo on the weekend, but then they'll go and they'll dominate Milan in Milan for the Coppa Italia because it's actually silverware at stake. And I'm not sure. It's just been a very confusing team. The way they played yesterday, they looked so dominant at times, and then they're ready to like throw away points, like we said. So I don't know what to expect for Wednesday in terms of who's going to play, but I definitely expect a very, very motivated team that may take advantage of an Atalanta side that's got one eye on a Champions League berth too. So they're juggling more balls at this point, and they continue to collect points in convincing ways. So and then there's the revenge factor too from last week. So I expect a very motivated, hungry side regardless of who plays. But I have a suspicious feeling that Inzaghi may lean towards playing Milinkovic-Savic even if he's not 100% healthy.
I think Parolo will start instead of Milinkovic-Savic, but I'm pretty sure that Milinkovic-Savic will come in the second half. And guys, I think this is probably the first time where we reach a very important match like the Coppa Italia final, and we have so many question marks because we have Proto or Strakosha playing. Strakosha as well this morning didn't train with the team. We have Milinkovic-Savic. We don't know if he's going to start. We don't know if Caicedo's going to start instead of Ciro Immobile. I want your opinion on this. And as well, Marusic, for me, yesterday played really, really well. So is Marusic going to start or Romulo's going to start? This is probably the first time this year that Inzaghi has so many question marks, because usually we were, already knowing on Friday, okay, Inzaghi is going to play with 3-5-2 and these are the players. You could get wrong one defender usually, but 10 out of 11 we knew already who were. Instead, this time, there are pretty much a lot of doubts. So, Alistair, starting from you, do you play Romulo Marusic and do you play Ciro Caicedo on Wednesday?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you've asked these questions. I just had a quick look at it to see if we'd had questions on Twitter, and it turns out that these are the exact same questions that some people are asking us as well. So, I think that for me, I've said, and I wrote last week, that for me, you have to go on form, and at the moment that means leaving Ciro on the bench. again, like going back to what Mike has just been saying there we've said this time and again, there's one thing saying what you think should happen and one thing saying what you think Inzaghi will do. And I cannot imagine Inzaghi benching Ciro, but I think he should. I think that Caicedo and Correa, again, against Cagliari, was a success. Another win. They've won every game they played together. The link-up between Correa and Alberto working very nicely, and Correa and Caicedo seems to get involved in those little triangles and find the space and occupy defenders a lot better than Immobile has been. And yeah, I think that if you've got a good thing going, then why change it for your biggest game of the season? But when it comes to Romulo Maricic, I think that's a bit trickier because there's not massive distance between them in terms of form or ability. I'd say I'd probably go with Romulo. I think that just he gives me a bit more confidence defensively than Maricic does, and I think in terms of trying to peg back the likes of Castan or Gosens, depending who starts on the left for them, that's the Atalanta wing-backs are a real threat, and we're going to need whoever plays there to have a good game defensively. So for me, I think that I'd probably go Romulo Caicedo if you're talking about those two positions.
And if you're talking about form too, you would go that way. But I also look at who got us there, and Correa got us there in terms of through the Coppa Italia specifically. But I have no doubts Inzaghi will lean once again towards Ciro leading the attack. And if he was even unsure, he probably wouldn't have played Caicedo for the full match yesterday. He says he wants to throw them off, great, and keep them guessing. But time and time again this year, Caicedo's gotten the short end of the stick, even though he deserves to start more than anybody this season. Quite frankly, he's probably, if not been our best player. Think of all the points he's won us compared to the likes of Ciro and what he's offered coming off the bench too in games. And I couldn't be happier for him because he caught a lot of shit last year at the end of the year, obviously for the game against Crotone, and you can tell it's weighed on him a lot because after the derby he still referenced it this year. So I think really if you're talking about merit, yeah, Caicedo should play, so should Correa based on getting us there, but I won't be surprised when I see Immobile lead the attack. And who can really blame Inzaghi? That's he doesn't have the balls to take him out, and he's proved that time and time again this year, even when Ciro should have been benched.
It's interesting you phrase it like that because I've just looked at our questions here. One of them from Steven Scarpula says, does Inzaghi have the cojones to start Caicedo over Ciro on Wednesday, and would we? And that you just mentioned him not having the balls as well. Do you think that that's what it is that he's afraid of dropping a star player, or is it simply because I find this a really tricky argument to get around in my head, because we know that Immobile is the better player of the two when you put them up on pure ability, but that's just not the way they've been playing at the moment. And in my opinion, that's what I've been saying, you need to go in form. But do you think that there's a certain element of that, is that Inzaghi's afraid of benching Immobile, afraid of it making him unhappy, or I don't know. It does seem to be a recurring theme, is that people reference the bravery of the decision, I suppose.
And yeah, no, and it's not just with Immobile. There's that group of senators that they always reference, and Immobile somehow found himself among the veterans right away in that squad less than 2 years ago, and Lulic is among them too, that continuously start, and Radu will be there in the starting 11 come Wednesday as well. This is just Inzaghi, A, not having the balls, yes, and B, also some preferential treatment based on some history there for whatever reason. But at the same token, if it wasn't for Inzaghi, Caicedo wouldn't be in the squad this year. They would have sold him probably in the summer, because it sounded like there was a real willingness to at least send him out on loan, and Inzaghi fought to keep him. So it's not so much his lack of trust in Caicedo, but yes, I think more of a fear, or at least I'm leaning towards that, more of a fear to bench Inzaghi. I mean, to bench Immobile, sorry.
I'm not sure. Honestly, Caicedo played well the first half, like Luis Alberto did, but disappeared in the second, and this is not the first time that happens for both players. So, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Immobile starts, and at the same time, I wouldn't blame Inzaghi. I mean, I'm not convinced Caicedo is playing well as he was doing a couple of weeks ago. So I don't think it would be a terrible decision. Plus, we saw how Caicedo in big matches have failed. You were talking about Crotone's match last year. Well, Lazio didn't reach the Champions League for that error. So, I think it's normal that he still remembers that. And maybe, I will start Ciro Immobile Wednesday. What I didn't understand is why playing Ciro Immobile yesterday in the last 7 minutes. I thought,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Why don't you give a chance to Pedro Neto? 7 minutes, let him play instead of putting in Ciro Immobile. Didn't need that time. And don't tell me I put him in because maybe he could score. Yeah, in 7 minutes. Come on, Lazio was struggling to play football, and now suddenly they score. That's more the biggest question for me.
I would say that was more of a confidence thing because we know we're spending time talking about how frustrating Ciro Immobile has been this year. We're talking about a guy who scored 29 goals last year, and now he's barely cracked 13, and more than half of those are probably penalties. I don't even know the stat off the top of my head, but regardless, I think what Inzaghi was doing there is giving him a run out and maybe hoping he could do something to gain a little bit of confidence going into Wednesday because he desperately needs it.
Yeah, I can understand he needs confidence, but them making him come in earlier, I don't know. Anyway, I think honestly, Ciro Immobile will start. I believe Marusic can start on Wednesday. I really liked how he played yesterday. The biggest question, guys, is who will play in defense. Will we see Radu, Acerbi, and Felipe Luis playing there, or will Inzaghi rotate again? I have to be honest, I'm a big fan of Felipe Luis, but yesterday he didn't convince me. He looked a little bit nervous, make a couple of stupid mistakes we are not used to see him doing. So, yeah.
Time for Wallace is what you're saying, yeah?
No.
Well, It might not be up to you, Vittorio. You started this thing about George Mendes and how the club is a slave to some of these agents. So I wouldn't be surprised if Wallace does feature in the final.
Guys, to be honest with you, I was frightened when Inzaghi said, Wallace has the same chance to start against Cagliari like all the other defenders. Now, I hope he said it to defend the player. He really didn't think about it. But then, reading the paper on Friday morning, he tried Wallace as well in the so-called starting team in the last training. Alistair, Michael, I mean, after a mistake like that, I would say, Wallace, you finished the season training with the Primavera. Instead, he's there,
Well, yeah, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see Costas, but you've touched on all the politics behind it. So I'm leaning towards all the suspicions, and I love that sort of stuff.
But then again, on the other hand, right, as one thing Inzaghi's good at is keeping a good team spirit, right, and taking responsibility and defending his players, and he was doing that again after Wallace made that error. And on the one hand, yeah, chuck him in the Primavera. He's clearly not good enough, and he keeps making the same mistakes, and he's been here for 3 years, and he's not getting any better at it. But at the same time, as a coach who wants to defend his players' confidence, he might have thought, well, you know what, the best thing to do here might be to just get him playing again as soon as possible and get him through 90 minutes and if he has a decent game, then it's kind of all in the past. Whereas we're in this situation now where the next time he touches a ball at the Olimpico, nobody's going to be very happy to see him. And, it kind of makes me think, which is a bit of a shame in my mind, about Dusan Basta, who's been a great servant to Lazio. And we said after the game, I think, the Frankfurt game 4-1, that's probably his last game for Lazio, getting sent off in the first half and having a terrible match. And he doesn't really deserve to be remembered in that way. And he almost could have done with being given another game quite soon after that, just so that he could rise past it. But he won't be, and he'll be leaving the club now. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame. But I think that, it's just so obvious with Wallace. Like I say, it's been It's been 3 years, and there's no sign of him getting rid of this problem with his game. Unlike Bastos, who I'd say we have seen improvement from, and we've seen him really make more of an impact this season than we expected. He's not a perfect defender, but I think we've actually seen signs of improvement from him that we haven't seen from Wallace.
Yes, so who would start for you on Wednesday?
I'd like to see Felipe Radu at Acerbi. That's my kind of number one lineup. But I wasn't like you. I wasn't too impressed with Felipe yesterday. I wasn't actually too impressed with Radu either. But I think that hopefully that's more a case of returning from injury. And Bastos has been playing pretty well. I think people were complaining about the way he defended for the goal yesterday. Probably could have done better, but Pavoletti's not an easy guy to compete with in the air. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to be in a position where you're actually considering Bastos as a worthy option, but which he wouldn't have been not too long ago. But yeah, for me, it still has to be those three: Felipe, Acerbi, and Radu, because they can all defend and they can all pass and use their feet, and that's what we need for this defense to work, in my opinion.
Michael?
What? No Patrick?
He's injured.
No. Oh, too bad.
I know.
Shucks. No, for me, I would agree on physical ability, Luis Felipe, but I've noticed some chinks in the armor this year a few times where he's gone to ground in the box and tried to do some crazy slide tackles. And sometimes the moment or the importance of the game catches up with him. He's still very young, lest we forget how young Luis Felipe is. For me, based on merit, really, the people who got us there were really Bastos, Acerbi, and Patrick over the 2 legs against Milan. But I would like to see Bastos. I have no problem with Bastos. I know what to expect with Bastos. I think that the time, so many times he gets lumped in with Wallace based on mistakes, but I think the whole reason we're having this discussion is nobody has really outperformed another in terms of defense outside of Acerbi. There are days, very few, that Wallace has looked good. I mean, he's living off the lineage of how well he played against Ronaldo at the beginning of the season, and everybody was saying, "Mamma mia, what a game from Wallace, effectively shutting down Ronaldo." And so he's living off the glory of that a lot. But Bastos has made his mistakes. Luis Felipe wanted to, emulate Wallace yesterday with his mistakes. So it's not like somebody's really risen above and really grabbed the starting position with both hands, similar to nobody really wanting the 4th place for the Champions League outside of Atalanta. It's been a hot potato of sorts, and everybody just keeps passing it around, and nobody really wants it. So, I mean, outside of really Wallace starting, I'm comfortable with whoever goes in the back. Obviously, Radu has the experience. He celebrated a milestone in terms of appearances yesterday. So, and unfortunately, he was unjustly suspended for so many games, which they obviously revoked. So he's available. I have no doubts he'll play, and I wouldn't mind seeing Bastos, but it really depends on the whole overall chemistry. If Luis Felipe plays better with Radu and they communicate better, then I'll settle for that. But make no mistake, Luis Felipe is very susceptible to as many mistakes as a Wallace or a Bastos, for that matter. Nobody's perfect back there between the 3 of them.
I just wanted to bring up one other thing, Vittorio, because
go on.
Just when it comes to the defensive selection, I think that something else I picked up on earlier this week was the fact that Radu and Lulic are the only 2 players we've now got left from the team that won the final in 2013, and I think that actually that experience is something that is going to be really important, because a cup final, it's obviously a big match, and we've had a lot of big matches, but there's a hell of a lot of it's a big festival. There's a hell of a lot of kind of pageantry around these kind of games, and that might get to the less experienced players a bit more. So I think that actually by selecting Radu, you do a little more than just play him on his defensive merit, but you actually have a guy there who's not going to be fazed by the occasion because he's been there and he's done it. And I think sometimes that can be down played a little bit, but that was 6 years ago now, that final, and I think we want those two guys on the pitch to provide a bit of leadership and to probably calm this team down a bit if things start going against them, because I wouldn't be surprised at all if the game started going the same way on Wednesday, where Lazio take a first half lead and Atalanta find their way back into it. The problem is that the team needs to be able to react to Atalanta getting back into a game in a way that they completely failed to do last weekend. They didn't even look like there was a moment when they were going to turn that game back around in their favour. And I think that by having Radu and Lulic on the pitch, hopefully that increases our chances of being able to react in a positive way when we're up against it, if that happens, which I think it probably will.
And you have to say something. That was probably the most difficult final Lazio will ever face, because it's not only the Coppa Italia final, it's the final against Roma. It's, we know how difficult a derby is, a derby in a Coppa Italia final, a Rome derby, because maybe people doesn't know, the Milan derby is nothing. The Torino derby is nothing compared to the Roma derby. So, that's not a simple Coppa Italia final. It's much, much more. So obviously this will make a big difference. And on the other side, I think it will make a big difference to Atalanta, because they're playing great football, they're a great team, etc., but none of them have ever played a final. And Papu Gomez is a good player, but no Coppa Italia final, and so on, all the other players. I think that this will affect the players. And let's not forget that next weekend they're going to play against Juventus. That's going to be probably the most important match of the season. If they win there, they're going to the Champions League. So I think these two factors will have a big, big impact on Atalanta performance. I don't know, guys, if you agree with me. I will start with Michael on this case.
In what way? From an experience standpoint, what are you trying to say?
Yeah, both saying that fact that Atalanta has no Coppa Italia final experience or final experience in general in the players, and as well they're playing next weekend against Juventus in a key match. This is going to affect their performance, I believe.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and I kind of alluded to that. We're probably more motivated going into Wednesday because they still have one eye on the Champions League, and it's hard to juggle all that stuff. Not to mention the fact that they're going to be playing Juventus next week. And depending on how the match goes today with those wonderful people you talked about earlier from the Derby, the crosstown friends of ours, I doubt I doubt Atalanta can be 100% focused. And on top of that, it's their first Coppa Italia final in 16-something years. We're not talking about a team that is a renowned powerhouse or challenges for silverware or high places usually. So they may get caught up in the moment. And I have no fear about Wednesday in terms of whether or not we jump out to an early lead Wednesday and how we recover. And I don't think that necessarily has anything to do with Radu or Lulic playing, because Lulic isn't always a steady hand in terms of keeping everybody calm and composed. He usually does his talking with his workman-like approach to the game, because we saw at the end of last year, in the most important game of last year, Lulic got caught up in the moment and got sent off. So he's not really a steady hand or somebody to look to for calm. But yes, an experience, no doubt. I just think that the difference between what happened last week versus Atalanta versus what's happening on Wednesday is Lazio only have the Coppa Italia now. We can say, yes, we can maybe qualify through the league, but it's not necessarily in our own hands. The Coppa Italia is in our hands to qualify for Europe, and I think that's essentially what will happen. You'll see a more desperate Lazio side pulling out all the stops to try to win. Meanwhile, Atalanta, if we do score early, will have to attack us. And that's usually bode well for Lazio. When a team actually comes to play against us and not set up shop defensively, the likes of Correa can really do damage, and Luis Alberto to a lesser extent on the counter. We saw it yesterday. Badel steals the ball at half field and turns something beautifully into a goal, working and linking between Luis Alberto, Marusic, and Caicedo, who's there to hold up the ball. Mind you, we don't know if all those players will actually be on the field together again on Wednesday, most likely not. But I'm pretty confident, and dare I say, I'm pretty positive again that we'll win on Wednesday.
Not again.
I've come to bring in all my positive vibes for you guys.
Alistair, what do you
Good,
think
it's
about my thoughts?
time. Yeah, well, I'm always just very worried about the kind of momentum factor. You know, this Atalanta team are absolutely flying at the moment, and it's quite hard not to like them. You know, the style of football they play, the courage they play with, the ability to kind of. I mean, Gasperini talked after Lazio game about the fact that one of the reasons they keep coming back from behind is that they're so utterly convinced about the football they play, and if they go behind, they're not bothered about it. Really, they keep doing their thing, keep playing their game, and then the results come from that. And I just think that there's still a little bit of a sense of people underestimating them, which kind of staggers me a bit at this stage, because they've proven over 36 weeks of this season that they are in the top 3 teams in Italy, and yet people are still kind of looking at them on paper and thinking that they should be beatable. But I really, really hope that there's no kind of there's no sense of that from Lazio on Wednesday, and I don't think there will be because of the game last Sunday as well. I think that that's been really helpful, not only as a kind of rehearsal of the match to see what they play like tactically and how this team stands up to them, but also to get a reminder of the fact that this team is definitely good enough to come to Rome and beat Lazio. So I think it's going to be a really evenly tested game, and for me the key really is going to be about the second half and Lazio's ability or not to basically focus and take a leaf out of Atalanta's book by having the conviction to keep playing their game. Like I say, I don't think they should be doing what they did against Cagliari and conceding possession and playing on the counter and basically letting teams come onto them, because I don't trust this team enough to see out games that way. I think that the strength of this team is playing those kind of quick passes, those triangles in attack, and stretching defenses in the way that they were in the first half yesterday, and that needs to be the model that they try and continue with throughout the 90 minutes instead of giving up halfway through. So, yeah, sorry. I mean, I've kind of gone through a whole load of things there, but that's where I think the game will be won and lost, is whether Lazio are capable of copying Atalanta in being able to trust their style and keep it going throughout the entire game.
Yes, but this brings me to something I already said. If you notice, Luis Alberto and Caicedo are the players that usually have a very good first half and disappear in the second half. And this happened even against Cagliari. And I don't think it's a physical condition. I think it's more a mental condition, especially for Luis Alberto. I think on Caicedo's case is he doesn't get any more the ball. So he's not a Ciro Immobile type of player who comes back, track backs to get the ball. He needs it in the box, etc. While Luis Alberto simply disappeared. And if you take off Luis Alberto, that it's the regista now of Lazio, well, that's the reason why Lazio doesn't create any more chances in the second half. And this is what concerned me more about Luis Alberto, because I was reading playing newspaper celebrating the return of Luis Alberto. I thought he played well the first half, even though he missed 2 unbelievable chances. But in the second half, again, he disappeared. And this is the biggest concern for Wednesday, because Atalanta plays 95 minutes at high speed. Luis Alberto showed that this year he's playing 45 minutes, not more.
Yes, but Atalanta did struggle yesterday. Genoa had no business even having a shout at a point in that game yesterday. I watched that closely, and they have flaws. We're giving a little bit too much respect, I think, to Atalanta as an opponent. Yes, okay, they've overexceeded expectations, but they bleed just like anybody else. They're human. And if you're telling me Masiello, for example, is a better holding midfielder or defender than Lucas Leiva, then we don't even bother showing up to the game. We're talking about 2 different classes of players here. I think on paper we're better. Obviously, it's been a frustrating season, and we haven't been able to display our capabilities, but we've seen them in flashes. I mean, we did beat Inter, we did beat Roma, we did beat some quality teams, quote unquote. But yes, we lack some mental
But Atalanta
lapses.
are better than all of it. This is my point. I think that Atalanta are better team
than Inter. They're better than Inter overall. I genuinely
think that they're right there. Yeah.
I think Atalanta plays better than Inter.
I'd much rather play Inter than Atalanta.
I'm not sure about that. I think Atalanta plays much better football, but Inter is a better team. And I think the question is, if Lazio can press Atalanta, their defense is weak. So
this is what I'm saying. Yes, I agree with you, Vittorio. We're talking about a team that plays well together. Yes, as a whole, as a unit. All of a sudden, Ilicic has been reborn, and he is some sort of player that gets fouled so often and commands all this respect from the referees. And he wasn't that guy at Fiorentina. All of a sudden, he is this imposing figure, sort of like Milinkovic-Savic was in terms of keeping the ball. And we've all got caught up in this Atalanta hype train, to be honest. And I have to say, I don't buy it. I don't know how we lost to them last week. Well, I know how we lost to them last week. We didn't give a shit. Well, it got to a point where the rain came down, and we said, you know what? Forget it. We weren't going to make Champions League anyways. We're going to bow out, and we're going to focus on the Coppa Italia. We don't do well when we have too many objectives on our plate. And it's not like we couldn't have beat them last week. We started the game well. We put in a workman's-like start to the game, and then we just decided we didn't want to win anymore.
I love you optimistic.
We haven't beaten Atalanta in the last 4 attempts now, I think. I think it's 4 defeats. So
I think we drew the first one. Last year.
Well, we haven't beaten then, yeah. But this is what I mean. It's that's what I'm saying about underestimating them. Yes, you look at these players on paper and you say, of course, yeah, this guy is not as good as this guy, and you can pick through their team and say that. But their strength is in the group. Their strength is in the way they're coached. Their strength is in their mentality. And you're talking there about Lazio saying, oh, well, the rain's coming down and we're losing, we're giving up. Well, that's been a problem with Lazio throughout this season. I mean, the same thing when we lost at home to Inter 3-0. You know, went behind, started well, went behind the arse and finished it. So why I don't know why you can't paint that as a positive thing, that this team on paper should be better than Atalanta. That's not going to be enough. So that's what I'm worried about, is that there's a chance that people are underestimating this team. I'm not saying that this is a team full of superstars that are going to walk over Lazio because they're a better quality of team than Lazio. I'm just saying that the strength has been in the fact that people have continuously underestimated them this season. That's something Lazio have no place doing when you take into consideration our record against them, the way that our playing, our problems in this team this season versus the way that they've been playing. And I think I'm convinced that Lazio have the ability to win this game on Wednesday, but I'm just saying that there's absolutely no chance that there should be even an inkling of underestimating Atalanta by this stage.
No, and I mean, this would be an incredible mistake. But I think the key for me for this match is the midfield. If Lazio keep the ball and push Atalanta, I think the weaknesses of this Atalanta is the defense. They are not very good defending, but they are so good playing football that most of the time they have the ball possession and they are attacking. So Lazio has to control the ball in midfield, and I think Lazio have the qualities to do it. My biggest question, and I said it before, is if Luis Alberto drops again like he did in the past week in the second half, then that's going to be the problem, because he's a regista. He's the one keeping the ball and moving the ball around. So that's why I think Lazio can lose the match. Because if Luis Alberto stop playing, then Lazio don't keep the ball and Atalanta can start playing the football they like. And this is what happened when we play against Atalanta last 2 Saturdays ago. Lazio did a very good first half. Then Wallace made mistakes, but at the same time, as Parolo said, Lazio stopped playing because Luis Alberto have disappeared and Mobile didn't play well, etc. So I think.
But there was also a catastrophic mistake by Wallace, like you said, and you saw the heads drop after that. And it reminded me so much of the derby from 2 years ago when he made that mistake as well, where there's just no coming back from certain mistakes. And we don't have that mentality. We don't have the gene to be able to do it. And this is why we're not fighting for the Champions League this year, because we don't have the mentality. And that's comes from the coach. It doesn't come from the players. That is Inzaghi to identify that, hey, Luis Alberto's performances drop now in the second half. I need to go to my bench and I need to bring in Cataldi, or I need to go and bring Milinkovic-Savic if he doesn't start. That is the sign of a good coach who has the foresight to say, hey, okay, if I don't make a change now, we risk losing this game and throwing away all the hard work we put in the first half.
I love Cataldi, but I don't think Cataldi is the same player of Luis Alberto. So the problem is Lazio doesn't have those options. If you think Juventus, they have so many options. But if Lazio takes off Luis Alberto, who's going to play there? Lazio doesn't have another regista. And this is a problem. And I don't believe that Lazio give up because Inzaghi said, hey guys, if Wallace make a mistake, it's over. Stop playing. No, I think this is...
No, I'm saying they stopped. They stopped. The players stopped. Inzaghi could have done something about it, but there's certain mistakes that you just don't come back from. It was my argument that the heads dropped and there was no coming back. If we're talking about taking out Luis Alberto, the chances are we're probably winning at that point in the second half because we're all talking like we're going to be winning in the first half. I mean, this conversation and this whole discussion is null and void if we're not leading by halftime. We're talking about our second half performances have always left a lot left to be desired. And if we're winning, then there is an opportunity to take out Luis Alberto and put in somebody else. And I'm not saying a like-for-like substitution. You're putting somebody in more defensively minded to absorb pressure in the midfield and cut off their attack before it starts. That's what I'm saying. I'm not arguing that we have the talent to replace Luis Alberto. No, not at all. But we do have other players that can come in and be shutdown players, sort of like what they've done in the past with Badel, who's supposed to come in and get fouled and slow the pace of the game down.
Alistair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we see these same themes appearing, and if the game does go in the way that we're, by the signs of it, kind of all expecting it to, where Lazio start well and begin to fade, I think there is a certain responsibility on Inzaghi to react a bit quicker than he has done in the past, and yeah, shake up that midfield if he needs to. I mean, it really struck me in that Atalanta game last weekend where sometimes the whole midfield's pushed up too high, and when we're already winning the game, Lucas has the ball and he's trying to make a pass through the Atalanta midfield, and if that pass goes astray, they're immediately through on a 3-on-3, and I just think there's far too much pressure almost on Lucas's passing range with that setup. I think that something I saw yesterday at times that I quite liked is the fact that Marco Parolo was able to kind of almost stay back in line with Lucas, and if you've got the three-man defence and almost like a kind of four-man midfield as your bank, then that provides a lot more stability than it does in the kind of Fantasia Lazio, where Milinkovic and Alberto are both pushing up to almost make a front four, and that's been devastating going forward at times, but it's also been far too easy for players, for opposition to cut through with basically one or two passes. It's been that easy at times to get through the Lazio midfield. So yeah, I kind of agree with what Mike said there, where I think Inzaghi needs to make a brave call. If the game's going that way, it's not the end of the world to bring on whether it's a Cataldi or a Badel or whatever, and sacrifice Alberto and say, right, we need to take control of this game. We need to be the ones dictating this game, not the ones who are reacting. And that's been my main issue recently in these second halves, is that Lazio turn from being a proactive team into being a reactive team, and they can be very good on the counter-attack and have scored some great counter-attacking goals, but I think as a kind of team strategy, it's not as effective.
One thing I was thinking before ending this podcast is that we were all saying before the semi-final, well, who wins against between Lazio and Milan is the clear favorite for the Coppa Italia final. Would you say now that Lazio is the favorite against Atalanta? I'm not sure about that. Well, Michael is, I think, but I'm not.
I think the home advantage is a big thing, though. I mean, that's something that is almost overlooked here because everyone just knows the Stadio Olimpico is the venue for the final. But, I mean, there's going to be a lot more Lazio fans and Atalanta fans in there, and it's in our home stadium. So, I mean, that does definitely give Lazio an advantage as well.
Lazio for the win, boys, and it's going to leave us feeling, happy, but also bittersweet in the sense that we're going to see some flashes of brilliance again, and that's my prediction. And we're going to say, why couldn't we have played this consistently over the course of the season? Because time and time again, the teams that have been chasing for that Champions League spot have not proven to want it. So I think with everything riding on the line and a chance for players to make a name for themselves and win a piece of silverware, which it seems like to me, and at least, there was that debate not too long ago, what would you rather have? The fourth spot and play in the Champions League next year or win the Coppa Italia? And I'm pretty sure it was a 60-40 split in terms of Coppa Italia and silverware, because it is prestigious and it does give you a direct access to Europe. And, silverware is nice for the cabinet because, at least we don't have to worry about going almost 11 years without winning a trophy.
12, I think it's now.
Oh, is it almost there? It's almost 12.
I think
There's
so.
a website dedicated just to it. I love it. I love it.
But Mike, as you were saying, as Lazio have won in the past, in the recent past, I would have hoped the fourth spot more than the Coppa Italia, because it's not the first Coppa Italia we're winning. So.
Well, no, for sure. And this is the problem. And this is why I'm annoyed because, for a couple of reasons. I mean, we're annoyed in general. And you can tell we're a little bit hostile with each other today because we're, anxious about the match Wednesday. We're pissed off with the way the team has played. But what I was going to say was I'm annoyed in the sense that, okay, now our season depends on, yes, winning the Coppa Italia. But the team shot themselves in the foot. We wouldn't really be having this discussion as much if the club didn't come out and say, hey, our objective this year is to make the Champions League. But they had no choice based on what happened at the end of last season. And we were so close and everything fell apart in the last two games of the season. And now the club said, well, our objective is the Champions League. Well, then they should have strengthened the squad accordingly and fought for the Champions League. You can't go in and expect just to qualify based on the fact that you retained your best players from last year. And I think this is a big learning lesson for Lotito. And really, it actually probably emphasizes his point, like, hey, if we make it great and I'll spend the money after we do, but I'm not going to go crazy trying to strengthen the squad because what happened when I tried to keep our best players? It didn't work out. And I'm annoyed now that we have to watch another game today of Juventus and Roma and hope and cheer for Juventus. That pisses me off because I hate Juventus almost as much as I hate Roma, but unfortunately, now we have to support Juventus today and hope that Roma loses because there wouldn't be no more satisfaction than, winning the Coppa Italia Wednesday and then watching them crash and burn and not make Europe.
Yeah, just consider for a moment the idea, which isn't that unrealistic, of Lazio winning the Coppa Italia and finishing ahead of Roma in the table. I mean, it's too good to be true, but, it is a realistic objective.
And this is why we're not going to make the Champions League because we're so preoccupied with bullshit like that, and this is the problem. And don't get me wrong, I'm just as excited as you are, Alistair, for that to happen because it would be great to rub it in their face. But really, we have to look beyond them at some point if we want to progress as a club and actually make the Champions League.
Of course, but I think that I don't think that people start the season looking at that as being an objective. It's just that that's where we've ended up now, is that's the best case scenario from where we are. It's a different thing from the beginning of the season saying you want to finish ahead of Roma, which is obviously not a good enough expectation or a demand for this club. But where we are now, that would be something that everyone would take, I think.
I think there's a chance, what maybe Mike was thinking, that Lazio arrive under Roma, and Roma still doesn't qualify for the Europe League, because if they lose today, they're pretty much out of the Champions League. But there's a big chance that they could arrive 7th, and if Lazio wins the Coppa Italia and arrive 8th, Lazio goes to the Europe League and Roma doesn't go anywhere this year, which would be dramatic for the financial issue.
Well, we're opening up a Pandora's box because to me personally, the Europa League doesn't bring me any sort of pride that, we're in Europe, that's great. I mean, we've proven time and time again that our best seasons are when we're not preoccupied with European commitments and we finished higher up the table. But if we want to progress, my previous argument has to remain that we can't be preoccupied with what they're doing. If we've set the objective to, hey, we're a team that is going to compete every year for the Champions League, well, then we need to go out and prove that. And that comes from the upper staff, and that comes from management, because they haven't done enough to strengthen this squad. And I talked about that at the top of the show. Look at the players that we bought this year. None of them start. None of them have earned a starting place this year, aside from Acerbi, which is a direct replacement to a player, and Acerbi was already a proven player in Serie A.
Yeah, I totally agree. Guys, to wrap it up, how's it going to finish Wednesday? Exact score. Alistair?
3-1 Lazio.
Wow.
The result from last weekend flipped on its head.
That's exactly the same result I was going to say. That is hilarious that you said 3-1. And the goals are going to come from Immobile, at least one of them. And we're going to say, who cares? We were all worried about Chiro playing, but he's going to score. And we'll see the old Chiro.
Mike?
I would love Chiro to prove me wrong. That would make me very, very happy.
Mike, you agree? 3-1?
3-1, that's the exact scoreline. And I don't know where the other two goals are going to come from, but I know Shiro will be on the score sheet through one of the 3 goals at least. And maybe a second from the spot. Because what's going to happen is we'll take the lead early, like we talked about. Atalanta will pin us back, and then something will happen similar to the derby that will unlock the game for us. And then it'll be full speed ahead, celebrations. Everybody in Ponte Nuvio will be celebrating with beer. And maybe some walks to the Piazza della Libertà too.
Okay, wow, you're very optimistic. I would say 2-0 just because you are very optimistic. Lazio scoring in the first half, and then Atalanta risking everything in the second half and a counteract of Lazio. But we're going to see on Wednesday, and we're going to talk about it after the match. Thank you, Mike, for joining me. Thank you, Alistair, as usual, for joining the podcast. And remember, guys, we are on Twitter, on Facebook, and if you want to support our podcast, you can on patreon.com/Lazio Lounge. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me, and we're going to talk after the final of Coppa Italia. Bye!